Sheep meat, dairy and beef are due to be split between the pair when the UK completes its exit from the EU on December 31. We do know this. However, what is going on behind the scenes at the WTO? Joining us now is trade commentator Charles Finny. Evening, Charles.
Good evening, Sarah. Good to see you.
It's becoming a real cluster, and we're under just about a month to go. Do you believe that this quota is going to be evenly divided in such a short amount of time? Are we getting close, or what will it look like on the other side if we don't?
Okay, well, look, it is a very complicated equation, and there is good news, bad, and good news and bad news. So I'm not quite as exercised on this as Nigel Sterling, good friend of mine, but I think New Zealand is rightly worried. First point is that the way the EU and UK have treated these quotas is somewhat outrageous. They shouldn't be unilaterally determining what happens. It should be something that is negotiated. The problem, I think, is that there are multiple countries involved. And no one's actually quite sure what we're looking at in terms of the post-Brexit regime. The UK and the EU are still negotiating. Now, in recent hours, like the last 24 hours, there is increasing evidence and some signs that we might be getting quite close to a resolution of that negotiation. So that is the negotiation between UK and EU over the trading arrangement that will apply between the two of them. And once we get that, then I think the negotiations over the quota arrangements will get serious. Now, I think New Zealand's in a much better position than some of those parties that are negotiating with the EU and UK, in that we are in the middle of free trade agreement negotiations with both parties. Indeed, in a few minutes, day 2 of the 9th round of the EU-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement negotiations will kick off. So we have the opportunity to get this corrected through a second channel. So we've got the WTO negotiations going on, but we've also got a bilateral free trade agreement negotiation going on, and likewise with the UK. We've got to be patient, wait for UK and EU to solve their problems. Then I think we can start negotiating seriously, because they'll be able to know what their bottom lines are. Luckily for us, we've got this free trade agreement negotiation. So I think that we should be planning on several months of the quota arrangements being in place as the EU and UK determine unilaterally. However, long term, I think there will be another solution.
Is it really the weight of the WTO members coming together when Nigel wrote here that New Zealand's comments were endorsed by Russia, the United States, Canada, India, Australia, Mexico, Paraguay and Uruguay? It's not just us alone in this, is it?
No, except the quotas that we're most worried about are just about us. So those other members of the WTO are worried about their own quota arrangements. Ours is a particularly valuable one, hard fought. It's basically compensating us for UK's original entry into the EU and the market we lost, and is on very preferential terms, which is why it's so important.
So in terms of those bilateral agreements that sit to the side, how is things progressing where in the sensitivity with our direct negotiations with the EU, in particular around dairy?
Okay, well, we don't really know, because we have had a leaked offer from the EU, which was pretty terrible. The EU is proposing to revise that offer. That revised offer isn't going to be coming to New Zealand anytime soon, because again, it leads back to Brexit. The UK is a major competitor of New Zealand in the products that we produce, and they also want to trade into the EU. So the EU isn't going to be able to finalise any position until it knows what access the UK is going to be enjoying into the EU. So I think everything is queued up behind that negotiation between Brussels and London. Once that's out of the way, we can start to make some progress. So it's interesting that our negotiation with the UK was meant to have its third round before Christmas. I note that that's now been delayed until January. I think that is because of two factors. One, the UK is going to make its initial market access offer to us at that negotiation. So we'll begin to see how serious they are about a high quality free trade agreement. But secondly, they don't know what they can grant us because they're not sure what they're going to be granting the EU. So very frustrating for New Zealand, but we just have to be patient.
And of course, jumping up and down and throwing lawsuits around is certainly not something being recommended by Meat Industry Association's Chief Executive Suma Karapeva. It's certainly just going to be a wait and see. And we are small fry in the big scheme of things, aren't we?
Well, Surma is a very wise person, and I often defer to her. I think that in the short term, a case in the WTO isn't going to be resolving anything because these things take many months, if not years. So we're best to be negotiating. But if in the long term we don't get this resolved satisfactorily in terms of our bilateral free trade agreements, there's no guarantee that they will be finalised, for example, then I think we should be thinking about WTO action. Without doubt, the EU is in breach of its legal commitments to New Zealand.
So 2021 could be the World Cup of trade negotiations where everything comes to a head. Charles, you'll be looking forward to that.
Well, look, I think some of us are actually hoping that trade policy will become boring again without Donald Trump in the White House. But I think that in terms of New Zealand trade policy, 2021 is looking to be a very interesting year.
Yeah, and talking about Trump and that China relationship, New Zealand-China relationship is being said that it can withstand this friction. We're speaking about the interference with Five Eyes and the flow-on effect. It is a crucial market to us, but what do you believe is behind that we can withstand this friction?
Well, look, I think that if it were Australia or the US doing something that we really didn't think was proper, we would say so. And good friends can have disagreements. They agree on most things, but they can have disagreements on some issues. And that's how I see the situation. I think that China should be seeing this recent comment on Hong Kong in exactly that light. We're a democracy. We believe in open societies. We want to see Hong Kong as democratic as possible, with an independent judiciary, with a free press. And we are rightly concerned if we see these things being restricted by the Chinese government. China agreed that Hong Kong would have a period after the British withdrew where these things would be protected. They backtracked on those agreements, and it's quite proper for countries such as New Zealand to make statements. That said, we want to have a close relationship with China, and there will be issues where we will be agreeing with China and disagreeing with the US and others. In this case, I think we're in the right position, but China should not overinterpret New Zealand's position. We want to be friends with China. We want to have a close trading relationship, close political relationship, and there are issues where we're going to be working very closely. Climate change, for example.
What's the sort of commentary in your circles around where Joe Biden will stand?
Well, I think a lot of us are really looking forward to the 20th of January because we are sick and tired of a totally unpredictable United States. We just don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next. We have to stay up all night looking at our Twitter feeds to figure out what US policy is. Life is going to return more to normal. But that's great. However, there are underlying tensions between the United States and China. They were there before Donald Trump became president, and they're still there. And so those are going to be addressed by the Biden administration, and China won't always like that. But I think we're going to see a more normal way of approaching those issues. So it won't be diplomacy by Twitter or megaphone. It will be diplomacy by diplomacy. So there'll be discussions between officials on the quiet, between embassies, between senior leaders on telephones. You won't be reading about it as publicly. But those tensions are still there, and there is still risk that there will be serious trade disputes between those two major players.
And lastly, Charles, it would be remiss of me to not also talk to you about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, and that exclusion of India so far. I mean, that's a very big missed opportunity. What's your thoughts on how long it will take to get them on board?
Well, we've taken a number of years trying to get them on board. And frankly, the chances over the next year or two were very slim. So I think the members have decided, well, look, we just can't wait for India any longer. This is a valuable agreement in its own right. It's probably more valuable for some of the other players than it is for us. We already have free trade agreements with all the other parties to the agreement. We've got with ASEAN, we've got them with China, with Korea and Japan. But Japan, Korea and China do not have any free trade agreement linking them. This is the first time this is happening. This is three very major economies, three very major markets for New Zealand. So anything that is going to help make those markets perform better, be more open, help growth in those economies, that's a good thing for New Zealand. But the benefits are more indirect for us with this one than direct. There are some gains into Indonesia and Thailand, but basically this is an agreement which is going to be really helpful in terms of facilitating trade as opposed to liberalising trade. It's going to make us, all the members, operate from the same rules, have the same rules of origin, and it's going to sort of tidy up what we call the noodle bowl of free trade agreements in the area. It's going to simplify things for exporters, increase certainty. A great thing that's happened. But I hope we keep on trying to get India into the agreement, or keep on trying for a bilateral agreement, because that would be really powerful for New Zealand. Unfortunately, the Indian government doesn't seem to be prepared to be willing to take on the obligations that would be necessary to make an agreement possible.
Is this connected to the size of their dairy farms in India specifically?
I think dairy is a huge sensitivity there. They're a major producer, and they're worried about competition. I think it's actually more about economic models. They still have a very inward-looking economic model, sort of an India-first version of Donald Trump, and they're really reluctant to open to really efficient producers such as us. The idea that New Zealand is going to swamp the Indian market with milk is ridiculous, but they're just not willing to take that risk. But it's not just about New Zealand. I think actually it was more about China than New Zealand, and about China and manufacturing. So yes, we would be very competitive in the in agriculture space, as is China, incidentally. But China's super competitive, isn't it, in terms of manufacturing, and India is a major manufacturing powerhouse. So I think it's more about that.
Well, hopefully we can individually just get into bed with India and be done with it.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, Charles, it's always an absolute pleasure for you to break down the world's trade and what's going on in all parts and pockets, and how New Zealand is exposed to that. So I really appreciate your time on Sarah's Country.
This is Sarah's Country.